Hey everyone, I'm the Drink Pro. Today we're reviewing Eagle Rare store picks. What's up everyone, Kyle the Drink Pro here with you yet again. As always, thank you so much for watching, for liking, subscribing. Click that little bell for notifications. Any way that you can support the channel and keep watching these videos means the world to me. Now today we're going to be doing a review that I can't believe I haven't already done yet. Eagle Rare. This is one of the prototypical bourbons out there for people who haven't really got into the allocated whiskey scene that much. They're not digging into the super rares or the super expensives. But it's also one that people keep coming back to time and time and again when they are, experts or they are seasoned veterans in bourbon. They always come back to Eagle Rare, and Eagle Rare store picks are particularly valued right now. So let's talk about the history of Eagle Rare. Eagle Rare was first put on the market in 1975 by a guy named Charles Beam. Now the Beam name is obviously a big one in bourbon, so it's no surprise that a Beam had their hand on one of the big sellers in bourbon. Charles Beam was the master distiller at Seagram's, and Seagram's actually produced Eagle Rare for many years. It wasn't until 1989 that what has now become Sazerac bought the Eagle Rare brand. Now, when Eagle Rare was first developed in 1975, it was not a single barrel product. And, important to note, it was at 101 proof. So this was a blended whiskey. This was a 101 proof product, a lot more like what you see from Wild Turkey 101. Obviously today it's no longer 101 proof. Sazerac made some changes, and in 2005 they discontinued the 101 proof non-single barrel product. What we are left with though is a single barrel product, kind of, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it is sitting at 90 proof. It is still 10 years old and age stated, although I will say that modern bottles, it doesn't say 10 years on the front or on the neck. The 10-year-old statement is actually here on the back, which is a bit unusual, especially for an age stated product. You'd think they'd want to advertise that. It's the Buffalo Trace Mash Bill 1 or the Low Rye Mash Bill. Usually. That caveat there is because I know for a fact that Buffalo Trace isn't marrying itself to the Mash Bill 1 versus Mash Bill 2 divide when they're doing store picks. And all the whiskey I have in front of me today are store picks. They're also 375s. I don't know why I only have 375 store picks in my house of Eagle Rare. Go figure. But there are 750s, there are 1.5 liters or 1.75, the big boys, and they do have non-store pick products. The reason it's not technically a single barrel product, unless it has a sticker on it like these, is because Eagle Rare is bottled from one barrel to the next to the next. And essentially, the tubing that they're dumping these barrels through may blend two barrels or more than two barrels together. As one barrel finishes, the next barrel comes up and is dumped, and they don't stop the line, they don't have half-filled bottles, they just keep it going. So the bottles near the end of the barrel may have some of one barrel and some of another in them. At this point, I'm not sure how much people care about a blended product versus a single barrel product versus a store pick, because honestly, in my experience, there's a lot of variation in the store pick. Some are better than the standard products, but some are worse. And I've been burned too many times. So when I see single barrels, if I don't get a chance to try them, I'm probably not gonna buy them unless I know for a fact that a friend of mine or somebody I care about wants this bottle. And let me be clear, that's not all to blame on the private barrel clubs or the stores that are picking these barrels. I mean, they buy this stuff because they know it sells and it's fun to do the process. But at the end of the day, there's so many barrels that are being set aside for these private selections that the quality control is going to have to become different. They have to widen their standard of what qualifies for the single barrel programs. That didn't used to be the case. It used to be a special one-off occasion. So you could pick honey barrels and put them into these programs. That's not really the case anymore, at least not to the same degree as it once was. But enough about the history, let's get into the drinking. Now, like I said, I have three different Eagle Rare store picks here. One of them is the Rural Inn pick. Now, I say it's a pick, but there's this black line through the sticker, and that's because this pick was done during quarantine, and so it wasn't really a pick per se, it was a barrel that was selected for the Rural Inn. The other one I've got here is the 2020 Rural Inn. You can see this one is still sealed. We're gonna crack that open here in a second. And finally, shout out to Jack Anderson for providing me with a sample of the Buffalo Trace Grape Koolaid pick. Now this was a pick I believe in 2019. Actually, it might not say on here, but this was a pick from Warehouse L Floor 5. I like that they put that information on the bottle. So let's go ahead and pop this Eagle Rare. I got a couple of bottles of this because I absolutely fell in love with this pick. You know I'm a sucker for a fruity whiskey. Doesn't pop very well, but this one just hits all the right notes for me, and I'm really excited to compare it side by side with the Grape Kool-Aid. Now, if memory serves me, this one is not quite as fruity, but it was still a solid pick. And finally, the Grape Kool-Aid. Yes, the bottle is empty, but I've got it in a sample bottle. This was mostly to make sure it didn't have too much space to breathe in the bottle. I was a little bit worried about that, so I wanted to make sure that it was staying in a condition where there wasn't a chance for a lot of aeration to occur, or for the oxidation to happen, or for the evaporation, whatever the hell it is that's causing whiskey to age very rapidly for the worse in a bottle. Now, you might have noticed I had this fourth glass here. This fourth glass is because I am going to compare it with Standard Buffalo Trace. Now, this is also a store pick from Vine and Table, and the reason I'm doing this comparison is because on paper these whiskeys are very similar. They're from the same mash bill. Eagle Rare is obviously a 10-year age-stated product. Well, this one is between 8 and 10 years, depending on who you ask. That's the estimate, which would mean this would be incredibly similar on paper to Eagle Rare. So we'll see if that holds true in our tasting. All right, let's just go left to right. We're gonna start here with my freshly popped 2020 Rural Inn pick. Ooh, and right off the bat, it's got this beautiful sort of sweet fruit, citrus, raspberry. It's got like cinnamon and raspberry at the same time, which doesn't sound good in my head, but it smells just delicious. It's kind of funny, this one reminds me of sort of like that Ethiopian blueberry coffee vibe where you get a blueberry note and the coffee richness. This smells like that kind of coffee. You're definitely getting the classics, honey, vanilla, caramel, those kind of smells from this as well. But I also get that really nice earthiness. I mentioned the coffee, I'm also getting like a hint of chocolate from it as well. It's not nutty. It's not very oaky for 10 years in particular. This definitely leans towards the earthy spices, which is something I usually like in a whiskey, especially if it's paired well with a slight amount of oak and a significant amount of sweetness and fruitiness. Like I said, I'm coming into this kind of biased because I've got several bottles of that I've hunted down because I like it so much. Let's go ahead and taste this. Now, even though this is 90 proof, I have to say it's incredibly smooth for a 90 proof whiskey. Some people hate that term, smooth. They don't want it talked about in whiskey, but I disagree. Smoothness is an important quality. You just have to expand on what else is going on there. Why is it smooth? In what ways is the smoothness good or bad? You don't always want a smooth pour. Sometimes you want more character. Oh gosh. And then on that second taste, the fruit starts to come out. You get a little bit of the berry note, and then this wonderful herbal mid-palate, and then the finish has a very nice dusting of oakiness and pepper. It's subtle, but it's just well balanced. This is a really great pick. I'm really happy I was able to find a couple of bottles of this pick because I couldn't find the 750s, so I've been killing 375s instead. See, to me, this has the perfect amount of oak. It just gives you a hint of oak mid-palate into the finish, and then it's wonderfully sweet up front, and then you start to get almost a slight nuttiness. I didn't get any nuttiness on the nose, but on the palate, it starts to show up mid-palate into the finish as well. The oak layer is complex. It's not just dry oak, astringent, or even just wet, bogged down oak. No, it's oak with a nuttiness, with a pepper, and maybe even with like a hint of dark chocolate. This one's gonna disappear quick. Ooh yeah, and the fruit up front just becomes more and more prominent with each sip. I'm getting like stewed apples. The raspberry sticks around, the blueberry sticks around. It's just hitting all the notes I want it to. I'm gonna have to pour myself more to do side-by-sides in a minute. But we're about to jump to the strike-through version of the Eagle Rare pick from Rural Inn. It definitely still has that berry sweetness, which I just find is very classic Buffalo Trace. And some Eagle Rare picks don't have that. But to me, I don't get nearly as much berry from this. This is a little bit of like lemon citrus and some cinnamon red hots. I almost get eucalyptus from this. This has a minty quality that's very different for me than a lot of the other Eagle Rare picks. I'm also getting like a pine tree kind of vibe from it. I get a very slight peach and a very slight cherry. There are some fruit notes in here, like I said, and definitely this sort of citrus bright, almost pine sol vibe as well on the front. But you know, those notes are much more muted than I got from the 2020 Rural Inn pick. That one really has tons of berry for me up front, whereas this one, it's much more subtle. Let's taste it. Now this one to me is much nuttier. I get a lot of sweetness up front. Again, that classic vanilla and caramel. It leans more towards like corn syrup than caramel, but then the mid palate is just straight into the nuttiness. I get walnuts and I get hazelnuts. And there's still that sweetness throughout, but it's much less prominent in the berry category than the first one, and the nuttiness stands out a lot more than the oak or the pepper or anything. Also, the finish on this one for me is a little bit bitter. It has a bitter oak quality, a tannic quality that really doesn't do anything for me, unfortunately. Yeah, and this one also kind of falls flat on the front end for me. It's got a nice sweetness, but it's very subtle. There's not a lot of different notes for me to give you guys. If you like a nutty whiskey in the mid palate, and you want something that's not too complex, this is a really good option, but people usually like complexity or they like a very specific flavor profile. So I think this is a pretty niche market for this particular pour. This to me seems like the people who were down at Buffalo Trace doing the selection for the Rural Inn on their behalf were like, let's find a specific kind of profile that's a little different, a little bit more unique than a standard Eagle Rare, and give it to them. Now this one is Jack's donation, much appreciated, brother. This is the Grape Kool-Aid, a very sought after pick on the secondary market, I might add. It's worth noting that my sample of the Grape Kool-Aid was the last couple of ounces in the bottle. I think if you compare to the first couple of ounces of this Rural Inn pick, they're very similar, but that tells me that the initial tasting coming out of this bottle was much more predominantly grapey, and maybe had that sharp, sugary component that would make it a Kool-Aid vibe. Because both of those still show up for me on the nose. I still definitely get grapes. I would say, some of the big Concord grapes more so than say maybe a red grape or a green grape. But the sweetness is much, much more subtle than I think it probably was at the start of this profile when you fresh crack a bottle. That's not to say it isn't good, it definitely still smells good, but it's much more subtle than I would expect from a pour like this. I would say there is a rock candy quality to it, but there's also sort of a subtle clove or maybe even like peppermint, spearmint kind of vibe to it. It's got this underpinning spice that's hard to really hammer down for me. Yeah, the more I keep smelling this, the more I'm definitely getting that rock candy quality, and it does kind of attach to that grape fruitiness. I can definitely see why it was called Grape Kool-Aid. It does evoke that for sure. But I also think that if you just come to this without knowing what it is, if you did this thing blind, the first note you would pull out after you get that sort of rock candy sweetness is going to be a sweet aromatic spice. Now it could be maybe eucalyptus, it could be maybe that a nutmeg or a clove or a vanilla extract or even a tea. There's a lot of different spices I think that are in here, and they're all very subtle. The first thing is the rock candy, that's really predominant, but then second smell, second look, to me goes more in that direction. The grape I have to do some more digging for, I have to hunt for it. Whereas I think the fruit on this 2020 Rural Inn pick is very much upfront in your face. Let's give it a taste. Now I do have to say, on the palate, this is the fruitiest whiskey of the three. It's very sweet. It's got that nice fruity quality. A lot of things about it I really like. Yeah, this thing's got tons of blueberry, tons of grape. Mid-palate, definitely get that cinnamon and lots of the baking spices. It does fall a little flat for me on the finish. It's got pepper, but doesn't have oak or other sweet complexities. Let me go back really quick and taste these other two next to it and see which one I prefer. I do think at the end of the day, I'm torn between these two. The Rural Inn 2020 is not as sweet up front, but it has a much more interesting and complex finish for me. But the Grape Kool-Aid is such a nice, unique, specific profile, and it's one that I really enjoy. I think that the specificness of this profile from the strikeout pick from Rural Inn is actually really good, but it's just not my preferred profile. So it really does come down to what you prefer. I think all these are really solid. I can't really leave you hanging like that, so I'm just gonna give you as much as I can before this battery dies. It's sweet, but it's very quiet compared to the noses on these other ones. I mean, it's surprisingly similar, but it's much more subdued, which is interesting because I think the proof on all these is the same. I think they're all 90 proof. Oh, when I taste it, I think it is younger, and you can taste it because I'm getting a little bit more candy corn, a little bit more of that corn showing up. It's got a soft mouthfeel, almost a grain quality, which I find from younger whiskeys. I don't dislike it. I do like a grain quality in a whiskey, but it's just not quite what I'm looking for. This one's also got a really nice nutty walnut mid-palate into the finish. Drinking these side by side, I get a lot more caramel, I think, as well on the Buffalo Trace, but there's not as much interesting digging through the sharpness and the uniqueness. The Buffalo Trace, it definitely feels like the edges are more rounded out than the Eagle Rares. So I think it's a fun comparison. I think it's an interesting side-by-side, but I'm not sure I'd ever pick the Buffalo Trace store pick over an Eagle Rare store pick if I had to choose one, just because I do think this one is softer and more rounded out edges, and that's pretty typical. Not always the case. You gotta know store picks based on who's picking them, and get a chance to taste them if you can. If you can taste the store pick, always taste it before you buy it. Like I said, I'm kind of, not very high on store picks, and that's part of why I've been burned before. So I do think overall that this Buffalo Trace tastes younger. You can tell that it's not the full 10 years old. And this particular pick is good, but it seems quiet after comparing it to these much louder and sharp and narrow picks of Buffalo Trace. Each one kind of doing a different thing, but doing it in a very directed way. So that's it for me, guys. Appreciate you drinking with me. You all keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.